Good afternoon or good morning when you're watching this, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about Medicaid 101, some information from when you might need long-term care. My name is Deirdre Wheatley-Liss, and I will be your host today. I am delighted to bring you this latest installment of the Porzio Planning webinar series. Our mission with the webinar series is very, very simple. A knowledgeable family is an empowered family. So each month we take the opportunity to connect you with the people in our universe who we speak to when we have questions. Today I have my colleague Ryann Siclari with us. I will introduce you to in a little bit more detail in a moment. And when I've got questions on some of these Medicaid issues, Ryan's the person who I go to, so she'll be the one who will be sharing some information with us today. So this month we're really focused on Medicaid. Medicaid is the financial safety net addressing long-term care. As we talked about in a previous webinar that we had on Medicare, Medicare covers health and hospitalization. What happens if I get sick? What happens if I go to the doctor? Can they make me better? Medicare, generally speaking, does not provide any coverage, though, for long-term care. Long-term care being, I need help getting out of bed in the morning. I need help taking my medication. I need help showering. Those types of things is not something that Medicare is going to cover, but something that Medicaid does cover, along with a variety of other things that we will be talking about today. Here's the issue. Long-term care is extremely expensive. Genworth, Genworth, puts out a study every year on the cost of aging of long-term care. An average for New Jersey for a home health aide is $5,000 a month. So that's having somebody come into your house to be able to assist you. Assisted living, $6,650. And then a private nursing home, $11,900. And I note that this is the median cost in New Jersey, which means that for 50% of you, the costs are actually going to be higher than that. And in northern New Jersey is where we tend to experience those higher costs. I did mention that we had a previous webinar regarding Medicare. You can find that by going to PorzioPlanning.com. If you click at the top where it says free tips, you can then click on the video library and watch or listen to that at your convenience. So as I said, my name is Deirdre Wheatley-Liss. I'm a principal in the wealth preservation team for Porzio, Bromberg, and Newman. I'm also one of the founders of Porzio Planning. In addition to being an attorney licensed in New York and New Jersey, I have an advanced legal degree in tax, as well as being a certified elder law attorney, or CELA, and there's less than 50 of those in the state of New Jersey. Ryann, can you give your background to our audience so they can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. So I have a little bit of an interesting background. So I grew up in a military family. So I lived in Alaska starting when I was in elementary school, lived there we loved it so much. I lived all the way up until I graduated college. Then I moved to the East Coast for law school, where I attended Delaware Law School. And as if that wasn't painful enough, I went on to get my LLM, specializing specifically in the area of elder law. So once I became involved in elder law, my focus really narrowed down to a specialty in Medicaid and health law related issues.
Excellent, thank you. So by the way, if you look at that Genworth study and you look at the cost of care for long-term care in Alaska, it's about double what it is in New Jersey. So I don't know if that's going to make you feel any better at all, but I believe that long-term care planning in Alaska involves relocating to the lower 48 is probably the best idea. So before we get started, again, we offer these webinars as a service to you, as a service to the community. If you move your mouse around the screen, there's a Q&A box. If you have any questions at all as we're talking, please put the questions in the Q&A box. We will try to address them as we are going through the conversation. If we don't get to them, we will see them at the end and then just reach back out to you about any questions that you may have. We encourage questions. Again, this is a service we offer to the community, so if you have them, please ask them. We are here to be able to speak to you. So if you can flip to the next slide, please. Unlike Medicare, which everybody receives because they either turn a certain age or they have a disability, with Medicaid, there are a bunch of eligibility requirements. And of course, being that it's a government-sponsored program, the eligibility requirements are modified depending on what program it is that you're talking about. So before we get to some of those eligibility limits, Ryann, can you just share with our audience some of the different types of programs that Medicaid might be able to provide to a family when they're addressing long-term care needs or addressing just aging needs in general.
Sure. So one of the things I like to start off with is the understanding that you're either eligible for Medicaid or you're not eligible. It's not like that. There's lots of different Medicaid doors, which means there's lots of different Medicaid programs. So you may not be eligible for one Medicaid program, but you might be eligible for a different Medicaid program. The downside or difference is that some programs cover certain services, other programs do not cover certain services. So when we look at the programs, it's important to have that background understanding that just because you're eligible for a particular program does not mean that you will receive the services that you need. I'm sorry, Deirdre, do you hear that feedback?
I do not, but I'm going to put myself on mute just in case it's me.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. So with that being said, I want to talk to you about some of the different programs. One of the programs that, and this may not apply to you, but it might apply to a family member or friend. So it's really important that you take it in and understand what they are. So one of the first programs is supplemental security income. So most of us have worked during our lifetimes. We've paid into the Social Security system. When we reach retirement age, we begin to collect Social Security retirement. But not everyone has paid into the system enough to be eligible for that. So for those individuals, they receive SSI or Supplemental Security Income. When you're eligible for SSI, you're automatically Medicaid eligible. But what it doesn't cover is long-term care. It covers your hospital needs, your medical needs, your doctors, but not long-term care. So nursing homes, assisted livings are not covered by that program. Another program is Affordable Care Act Medicaid. This program is most commonly seen by younger people. And part of the reason for that is because to be eligible for ACA or Affordable Care Act Medicaid, you've got to be between the ages of 19 and 64. So for seniors, once they turn 65, they're no longer Affordable Care Act eligible. So you might see this for your children though. For example, if they turn 26, 27, they're no longer eligible to be on your health insurance. They need to get their own medical insurance. They might be eligible, depending on their income, for Affordable Care Act Medicaid. So the income eligibility for that program is 138% of the federal poverty level. That's a mouthful, but just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, for a household of one, so your child might be a single individual, their income must be below $1,482 a month. That's only $17,775 a year. It's a pretty low threshold. But if they're in college, for example, they might be below that threshold and be eligible for Affordable Care Act Medicaid. So talking long-term care, that's not usually the program we're going to be looking toward because it's for people who are between 16 and 64, though it does happen sometimes where an individual might need long-term care in that age group. The next program is the Aged, Blind, Disabled Program, or ABD for short. It's acronym soup in Medicaid land, but ABD is the next program. That one's for aged, blind, or disabled. They define aged as 65 or older, and then disabled would be according to the Social Security Administration. This is a really, really restrictive program. So for this program, the income must be below 100% of the federal poverty level. For a single person, that's only $1,074 a month. So the vast majority of people who are eligible for Social Security are going to be above that threshold just because of their Social Security earnings, let alone if they have a pension or other income coming in. And there's a resource limit. So what kind of assets can you have? So your bank accounts, your retirement accounts, your life insurance cash value have to be below $4,000 for a single person. And there's no flexibility with these. This is it. That's it. If you are above those thresholds, you are not eligible for the Aged, Blind, Disabled program. So for many of us, it's just simply not an option because of our income or our resources. Then there's managed long-term services and supports. I'm going to say that a couple of times. MLTSS, Managed Long-Term Services and Supports. That's the one. That's the program we're going to focus on today, because that is the program that covers long-term care. And when I say long-term care, I don't just mean nursing facilities and assisted living facilities. I also mean in-home care. And we're going to spend some more time talking about the details of in-home care later, so I'm not going to get into that yet. But I just want you to know that when I say long-term care, I'm not meaning just nursing homes. I mean all three possible situations. So it's important to talk about MLTSS, and Deirdre had mentioned this earlier, because there's really only 5 ways to pay for long-term care. You can use Medicare, but it only covers up to 100 days, assuming you meet all the Medicare requirements. If you don't meet the Medicare requirements, then it covers 0. You have long-term care insurance as an option, veterans benefits to a limited degree, private pay, which means paying out of your own pocket, and then Medicaid. Medicaid is the one that we are all going to fall back on when none of those other options apply.
So Ryan, this is what I was talking about at the beginning. Medicaid becomes the safety net, right? So if you can't be affording $12,000 a month for a nursing home, or $7,000, to $9,000 a month for assisted living, or $5,000 to $6,000 a month to have somebody come into your home, this is really what you need to support yourself as you age. And there's a lot of people out there who are very well set up for retirement, but they are not set up for retirement plus paying for long-term care over an extended period of time. So for the MLTSS, and I'm trying to say that slowly so I don't confuse my T's and my S's, what do the income and assets look like for that in comparison to like the Aged, Blind, and Disabled program that you described to the audience?
That's a really good question, because unlike the Aged, Blind, Disabled program, where I said there's very hard and fast rules and there's no flexibility, the MLTSS program has what we call spousal impoverishment protections. So it actually, if you're married especially, gives us a lot more flexibility when it comes to some of the income rules and some of the resource rules that we're going to talk about. So with that, I want to talk about eligibility for MLTSS in greater detail. And it's really important to understand that it's not just about the money. There's 2 components to being eligible for MLTSS. You must be clinically eligible, meaning how sick are you? How much help do you need? And you must be financially eligible. So I'm going to break out each one of those pieces and tell you what the requirements are. So for clinical eligibility, an individual must need what they call nursing facility level of care. It doesn't mean you need to be in a nursing home. It just needs to mean that you need that level of care. And they define that level of care as needing assistance in 3 or more activities of daily living. So that begs the question, well, what the heck is an activity of daily living? They're defined. So it's bathing, dressing, toilet use, walking, transferring, which is getting out and out of the chair, moving into the bed, and eating, so fork to mouth. But they also give you some flexibility because, somebody who suffers from Alzheimer's can physically bring a fork to their mouth, but they may not understand that they need to eat. So They also allow for what they call supervision and cueing in those activities of daily living. So if it's not safe for the person to bathe themselves based on their cognitive issues, that would still count, even though they may not physically need hands-on assistance. They need that supervision and cueing. They need to be told, you need to eat. It's been a while. So that's clinical eligibility. And I want to give you an example, because it's kind of hard to wrap your head around without some examples. So if you have, say, husband lives at home with his wife, and he suffers from a variety of ailments, limiting his ability to cook, limiting his ability to go grocery shopping, but he can walk, he can bathe himself, he can feed himself. He qualifies financially. What will happen is Medicaid's going to send a nurse out to assess him and say, do you meet these requirements? She's going to talk to him, talk to his wife, observe him, and she might say, yeah, you can't cook, you can't clean, but you can bathe and dress and walk and eat. So you're not clinically eligible for this program. And so it's really important to have that assessment in mind when you're looking to apply for this program. So in addition to the clinical piece, the part that more people have issues, most people who are looking for MLTSS are going to meet clinical because they're that sick. So it's very unusual for someone to not get to that point and be eligible, but I want you to know it's out there. Financial eligibility is often more the issue that people run into. So there are two components to financial eligibility. There's the income component and the resource component, and they are bifurcated by Medicaid in that way. So when it comes to income, there is an eligibility limit of $2,382 a month. That's the 2021 they call it the cap. But keep in mind, there are some flexibilities around that I'm going to get into in just a minute. So what counts towards that income cap? Well, if the person is single, their gross income, so their Social Security, their pension, that all counts towards that income cap. For a married person, remember I spoke earlier about those spousal impoverishment protections? Well, the government doesn't want the well spouse to be impoverished just because they have a spouse who's sick and needs care. So the government has rules that say the well spouse's income doesn't count towards that cap. Let me give you an example. So wife has income of $10,000 a month. She was a good hard worker, and she has $10,000 a month in income. Her husband, he had a little bit lower earning job. He took care of the kids, $2,000 a month. Medicaid's going to look at that and say, he's under 2382. We don't care what the wife's income is. We don't care what her Social Security, what her pension is, because she's not the Medicaid applicant. She gets to keep all that every single month. And I really like to focus on this because spouses are often so worried that all of their income is going to have to go to this expensive nursing home bill, and it scares them. So I really like to focus on that. The well spouse's income does not have to go to cost of care.
So Ryann, let's take the other example though, because I think a lot of our audience is concerned, what if it's flipped? So wife, is the one that had the $2,000 of income, and husband had the one that had the $10,000 of income. They collectively had $12,000 of income a month, and they have a lifestyle that is supported by $12,000 of income a month. Is there something that folks need to be aware of, that they might be able to not be, oh my God, Medicaid's going to take my house, but these spousal impoverishment or spousal supports that you were talking about?
Great, thank you. So that actually segues perfectly to what I was just about to talk about. So this is perfect. So remember I said there's a cap of 2,382. Well, the example Deirdre just gave, the husband, who's our ill or sick spouse in this case has $10,000 a month. So you're thinking, well, he can't be eligible. It's over 2382. Well, Medicaid has a process that you can use only for this MLTSS program, not the other Medicaid programs, to bring the income down properly for eligibility. What they use is called a qualified income trust, or QIT. Basically, the way that it works is it is a trust agreement, so essentially a separate bank account that the income is deposited in every month. And when you do that, Medicaid says, okay, we're not going to count that income for eligibility purposes. They'll still tell you what you can and cannot do with that income, but they're not going to preclude you from eligibility based on that income. But it's got to be every month. The income, $10,000 income, goes into this special bank account called a qualified income trust every single month. And then every single month, Medicaid tells you how you can spend it. And some of the things that they allow include a benefit for the well spouse. So that's called, I told you it's acronym soup. It's the triple MNA, so MMMNA. It's the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance. It's a lot. I know it's a mouthful, but it's a really, really important benefit because Medicaid's going to look and say, wife, does your $2,000 a month cover enough of what we think it needs to cover? They have a formula for it. So I'm not going to pretend that you'll get to keep all of husband's $10,000. You won't, but they will look at your monthly expenses. They're going to say, you pay X dollars in mortgage. We're going to take that into consideration in determining how much of your spouse's income you get to keep in order to make sure you can afford your expenses. So again, this is part of the spousal impoverishment rules. Now, going to this QIT again, because I like to hammer this one home because it's a minefield. The QIT is a minefield for families. And it's really sad because Medicaid uses the QIT not as a way to help families get eligibility, but more as a sword to keep them from being eligible. So if you make a mistake, they are going to deny you eligibility. So it's really important that you have proper counsel on how the QIT works every month. Because if you make a mistake, Medicaid will use it against you because it's very black and white in their eyes. It's either you did it right or you didn't do it right. So I encourage you, if you have a family member who's above that 2382, that you need to get counsel on how to operate this QIT, or you could be in a situation where you're continually getting denied and not understanding why, because Medicaid may not tell you why.
So Ryann, we have medical eligibility that we need to be able to do. We have income eligibility, which can vary based on, are you married? Are you single? If you're married, what's your income versus what is your spouse's income? But they also look at the assets. So can you share with the audience, something that they, how it is that they look at what are your assets for qualification purposes?
Yeah, so unlike income where we say spouses and husbands are very separate, it's not the same for your assets. They have a what's yours, mine, and ours rule. So whether it's the wife's, the husband's, jointly, Medicaid counts it. So both spouses' IRAs, both spouses' cash value of their life insurance policies, both spouses' annuities, these all count towards your resource assessment. And when we're looking at it, but how much you get to keep depends on whether you're single or married. So a single person is allowed to have $2,000 of resources. A married couple gets the $2,000, plus they get something called the community spouse Resource Allowance, or CSRA, Community Spouse Resource Allowance. So the way that's calculated is Medicaid takes all the assets, everything that counts, adds it all together, and says, you get to keep 50%. Spouse, you get to keep half of the assets, up to a maximum of approximately $130,000. Anything in excess of the $130,000, we want you to spend it. And you have to spend it on allowable things. You can't just give it away, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you have to spend it on allowable things. Now, when it comes to that calculation of assets that count towards your $2,000 and assets that count towards your CSRA, there are certain things that they're not going to use in that calculation. They're exempt. They don't count. Examples include your primary residence, if either spouse lives there. So whether husband's in the nursing home and wife's living there by herself, it's exempt. If husband is living there or a single person is living in the home because they're getting home-based services, it's exempt. It doesn't count towards that resource limit. But keep in mind, just because it doesn't count doesn't mean there's not planning you need to consider around it. So for example, husband is in the nursing facility, wife is home. The deed was in both their names, as is fairly typical, and they don't do anything because it's exempt. Now, sadly, wife passes away. The deed of the house automatically passes to the husband who's in the nursing home. Now Medicaid says, aha, it's not exempt anymore because nobody lives there. You have to sell it and use the money for the nursing home. So there are steps that should be taken even if an asset is exempt. So I always like to point that out because people miss it sometimes because they think it doesn't count. There's nothing that needs to be done. It's simply not the case. Another example of an exempt asset is a car, one car, not two cars, one car. And that won't count towards that resource assessment that we're talking about.
So Ryan, I just want to say, the residence is a huge thing because if you forget to do a plan around it after you've even gotten Medicaid, you can have a very unpleasant surprise. And for many people, it's one of their largest assets is their residence that they have. I do want to focus on what you said, that you have to spend it on allowable things. And I'm not going to go into detail during this webinar because we actually have an upcoming webinar that's scheduled for next month. So if you want to go ahead and calendar it, that's going to be on April 9th, separately just talking about 5-year planning for Medicaid. But just the thought that I want to leave you with is Ryan said that you have to spend it. You can't just give it away. At a very high level, if you give away assets in the 5 years before you apply for Medicaid, Medicaid basically pretends that you still have those assets. And this is a problem because, as Ryan said, you have to spend your assets. How do you spend assets that you don't in fact actually have because you have given them away to somebody else? So that's what we're going to focus on during the Porzio Planning webinar series for April. The other point that I just wanted to talk about is with the joint assets, and this is something, Ryan, that I don't know if you've seen with clients, is that if it's joint with somebody else, not a spouse, maybe with your child, that there's this idea that it's not mine. Does Medicaid believe that if you put your daughter's name on your bank account that it's no longer yours?
I wish they believed that, but unfortunately, that is a very, very good point. That just because your asset is owned jointly with someone else doesn't mean it is an exempt asset. Medicaid is going to say, well, if you own X, Y, and Z bank account with your daughter, do you still have the right to take all the money out? Oh, you do? Okay, it counts for you. So that's what they're going to look at, is if you have the right to take that money, it's yours.
Fair enough. Before we talk to some of the in-home support services that Medicaid provides, and then we can end quickly with, I think people are much more familiar with the assisted living and nursing home settings. So I'd like to focus on some of the in-home services. Can you just sort of walk people through the application process, right? Because maybe a person doesn't know at the beginning, oh, is there an income limit that I need to be able to look at all? Or maybe a person doesn't know, are my assets, is my 50%, am I under the $130,000 or am I not under the $130,000? And just as an aside, one of the reasons we're going to speak about 5-year planning separately is that $130,000 number is set federally across the country. And I would suggest to you that $130,000 might buy more in Alaska, as an example, Ryan, than it does in northern New Jersey and the New York City metropolitan area.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
So the application process I'm not gonna lie, it's a bear. And the reason it's a bear is because of what they call the 5-year look back. And so what that means is when you apply for Medicaid, Medicaid requires copies of financial statements for every account, even if it's closed at the time you apply. Anything that's been open during the 5 years prior to the Medicaid application for either spouse has to have all of the financial records provided with the application. So for example, if I was applying for Medicaid today, which is March 12th, I would be asking Medicaid for an eligibility of March 1st, 2021. That means when I apply, I need to supply to them records going back to March 1st, 2016 for everything that's been opened between March 1st, 2016 to March 1st, 2021. Every single account statement. But not only do you need to provide the account statements, you got to verify all the transactions. So every county is a little bit different on this. Most counties require transactions of $1,000 or more. So for example, if I wrote a check to get my roof done for $8,000, they're going to say, prove it. Prove where that money went. I want to see the check or see a statement supporting that. So it is a very cumbersome process to apply. And when you're applying, one of the things they do is they take those statements and they go line by line to see if you've made any transfers for less than fair market value during that 5-year period. So what do I mean by less than fair market value? Well, example, I give my daughter $10,000. That's a transfer. I didn't get anything in return, so it's a transfer for less than fair market value. It's a gift. It's a gift in the 5-year look back period. They're going to note it. Another example might be I transfer my house to my daughter for $1,000, $10, $1. Medicaid's going to say, well, what was the house worth? It was $200,000. That was a transfer for less than fair market value because you gave your house away for less than it was worth. That's going to be a transaction. They're going to take a note. What they're going to do is they're going to add all of those transactions together during the 5-year period. Then what they'll do is they'll say, you weren't supposed to do that. Those were gifts. And we're going to assess a penalty period based on those transfers. And the way they do this is they take what they call a penalty divisor. It's a number that they issue every year that's supposed to simulate the average cost of a day in a nursing facility in New Jersey. Right now, that figure is $357.67. So what they'll do is they'll take the total amount of those gifts over the 5 years, divide it by this penalty divisor, and it spits out a number of days. And so when you apply, I applied for March 1st, right? Medicaid's going to say, based on the gifts you made, you're not eligible March 1st. You're going to be eligible in 300 days or 400 days or however many days that the penalty period is. So for example, if I gave away $123,500, Medicaid's going to do the math and say, oh, that's 345 days you're not eligible. So the kick though is for that time period to start, you have to be eligible for Medicaid. So that means you got to be under the $2,000. So you apply March 1st, you have $2,000 in the bank. Medicaid says, we're not going to pay for your long-term care for another 345 days. See you later. good luck. And, so
and if that causes stress to you, that is why we're going to do a totally separate webinar on it next month, just talking about that. Before we move to the in-home care piece, we had a question that came through for somebody that also has a private long-term care policy. So they have two questions. One, can you deposit Social Security and pensions into a QIT? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. The next question is, how can you use a private policy in conjunction with what Medicaid provides? And I think this is going back to sort of those income limits that you were talking about. So now I'm sick. I have my 3 activities of daily living. I have a long-term care policy. It says it will provide me $200 a day as an example. How does that work then? Are you now kicked off? You can't qualify for Medicaid because you try to do some planning in advance?
So no, it doesn't kick you off the program. It's just a matter of, okay, how is this long-term care being paid for? Is it being paid directly to a facility or directly to a provider? Is it coming to you in cash and then you're paying? So a lot of it is very dependent on how the policy itself works. But the bottom line is under either situation, there are planning techniques we can use to make sure it doesn't preclude you from using Medicaid.
Excellent. And that's a great question. So I think when we're talking about the 5-year planning next month, we should just make a note how long-term care integrates with an overall plan. I think about 12% of the population or something along those lines has long-term care policies. But as Ryan said, the average cost for Medicaid for a day of care in New Jersey is $357.67. So you may have a $200 a day policy or even a $300 a day policy, but there's still a shortfall that you need to be concerned about. But we'll talk about that next month. Moving to sort of the idea of, let's say I don't want to go to a nursing home. I don't want to go to an assisted living. I want to age in place. If you can advance the slides, please. Can you talk about, and this is something that I think is so underpublished, I think is the word that I'm going to use, is the idea that Medicaid can help you when you're still at home, that you don't have to move to an assisted living and that you don't have to move to a nursing home. So can you give our audience sort of some ideas about how Medicaid can support you if you're now that husband in your example before, but instead of going into a facility, he's staying at home with his wife being in the home as well?
Yes, so MLTSS, the Managed Long-Term Services and Supports Medicaid program, offers what we coin as home and community-based services. And part of the interesting thing about this program is, remember I told you at the beginning, there's a bunch of different Medicaid programs? Well, all of the Medicaid programs actually provide what we call personal care assistance, PCA, which you all are very familiar with as home health aides. So any one of the Medicaid programs will give you a home health aide. You don't necessarily need MLTSS to get that particular benefit. But there's a whole slew of benefits that are only available through the MLTSS program. It's a special package of benefits, and it includes home delivered meals, medication dispensing devices and monthly monitoring, non-medical transportation. So if they need to be transported to a day program or to the grocery store or something of that nature, non-medical, a personal emergency response system or a life alert covered under this. And the big one, private duty nursing. So sometimes a home health aide is simply not enough to meet the person's needs, and you would only be eligible for private duty nursing under the MLTSS program. It also covers residential modifications. So you need a door widened in a bathroom because the wheelchair won't fit. There are provisions available for residential modifications. Respite's huge because you have the spouse at home taking care of their loved one, and it can be very exhausting, and sometimes they just need a little short break. So respite for up to 30 days a year is included. Social adult daycare. So I'm not talking about someone who needs to be in adult daycare because they have significant medical needs. I mean someone who just needs to get out of the house for the day and socialized. So social adult daycare is only covered under MLTSS. And then it also covers vehicle modification. So if you need a wheelchair lift installed in the vehicle, that is something else that can also be covered under this. So I'd like to just go back for a second to that PCA benefit, that home health aid, because that's really one of the biggest benefits that people are looking for Medicaid for when they're in a home and community-based setting. And I said it when I started talking about this, I said, oh, you can get this benefit on any Medicaid program. But remember, MLTSS is the one that gives us the greatest financial flexibility. So for many, many, many people, they're just not going to be eligible for any program except MLTSS to get that benefit. So the PCA, or home health aid benefit, it will never provide 24/7 care for your loved one. It's just, that's not what the benefit is meant to do. It is a restrictive test. And so they have assessment. They'll send a nurse out to say, we think you need X hours for bathing. We think you need X hours for transferring, getting in and out of the chair, for help walking. And they'll assess you a number of hours based on the nurse's assessment. And I'll tell you, the tool is geared towards giving people 40 hours or less. So it's something that if you are in need of full-time home health aid assistance, home and community-based services may not be the right path. But that's where we come in to help you analyze, is this going to be feasible for me or not?
So Ryan, I just want to emphasize that, because I think when we were first talking and people might have heard, I can get help at home, then that's great. And now you just sort of burst the bubble a little bit because it's only like 40 hours a month. But as we talk about from a practical perspective, you mentioned the application process, which is, for most people who live in New Jersey, you have a certain amount, because we have a higher cost of living. We also have higher salaries for it is the things that have here. It tends to be more complicated, right? I'm getting $5,000 a month. I need to be under this number. How exactly can I go about doing that? The application process. Do I have 5 years of records? Do I not have 5 years of records? But what I'd like to encourage the audience to think about is many times aging is not an off the cliff event. Aging is I start to need some level of care. And I'd like to encourage the audience to consider, if you had 20 hours of care a month, would that potentially allow, again, my husband and wife situation, or your husband and wife situation from before, that my wife isn't going to end up getting sick. Mom isn't going to end up getting sick, constantly taking care of dad, because dad's really biggest needs are getting out of bed in the morning, as an example, or his biggest needs are, being driven somewhere, whatever the case may be that needs to end up happening. So I'd really like to encourage the audience to consider that Medicaid can be part of a long-term planning strategy, that the Medicaid benefits that you're seeking and qualified for can expand over time as your needs expand over time. But by having them sooner rather than later, you may be able to spend more time at home, because if somebody's there, in my example, getting dad out of bed in the morning, it is less likely that mom is going to fall and break her hip getting dad out of bed in the morning, at which point in time there is no one there to be able to care for dad. So I just wanted to make that commentary to our audience, because in working with families over the years, I think it's so critical that they think of, what help can I get sooner rather than later for what it is that they're talking about. I also just want to emphasize what you talked about respite care, just because it's the same thing. I haven't seen, the stress levels. What are the most stressful things in your life? Usually it's, death, public speaking, buying and selling a house. They should have caregiving up there. Caregiving is an incredibly draining activity for people to be as part of. So even if you were just able to qualify for Medicaid and all you did was utilize it for 30 days a year for, again, mom, wife, in your example, to get a break, I think that you would have a much healthier and happier family by knowing that these are benefits. It's not a permanent solution. We don't need a permanent solution, but we need support, and New Jersey may be there to be able to support us. So I just wanted to give some of that commentary. I don't know if you have other comments about MLTSS, but
Yeah, one little thing before we move on to the next topic here is I just always like to point out that when you get this home health aid benefit, you don't have to necessarily use an agency. Medicaid has what's called the PPP, or Personal Preference Program, that allows the person to hire their own caregivers. Sometimes those are family members, like a daughter or a son or a niece, nephew. And so you can actually use the Medicaid program to pay these individuals for the help that they're probably providing for free.
That's a great point, because they probably are. And I think that there is, because Medicaid does really have a bias towards third parties, towards institutions in terms of the way that it ends up working. And this is a way then to be able to have your daughter-in-law or whoever the case may be. And again, it's not going to cover 24/7 care, but it maybe covers 30, 40 hours a week for what your family is doing in any event. That may be something that then becomes very valuable to your family, because that then allows your daughter-in-law, in my example, to be able to not be making a decision between, do I provide care or do I not work, so that they're not necessarily in that situation. So Ryan, right now we've got less than 15 minutes left. Can you talk about some of these other programs that, again, for aging in place, people may need to be aware of that can support the ability to be able to age in place?
Yeah, so the first program I'm going to talk about, it has to do with the Medicare Part B premium. So we're all very familiar, when you become Medicare eligible, there's Part A, which covers your hospitals, and that's typically free. And then there's Medicare Part B, which covers your physicians. And that coverage, that health insurance coverage of Medicare Part B, has a premium associated with it. It's about $150 a month, a little less. And some people don't realize that there are programs to help low-income seniors cover that Medicare Part B premium. And I see it very frequently where someone actually does qualify to have this, typically a very senior individual who has low income, and they have been paying their Medicare Part B premium for years, and they really didn't have to. So the program I'm talking about is called SLMB, Specified Low Income Medicare Beneficiaries, or SLMB, for those who are tired of saying all the letters of the alphabet. So this program basically says that if your income is up to 135% of the federal poverty level, so for a single person, that's $1,449 a month, $1,449 a month. And you have resources as a single person, so money in the bank under $7,970, that SLMB will pay your Medicare Part B premium for you. So just something to be aware of. You may have low-income seniors in your life who would be eligible for this, and it's a little bit every month helps. Another important program has to do with prescription drug coverage. So there's PAD, P-A-A-D, which is Prescription Assistance for the Aged and Disabled. And then there's Senior Gold, which is another prescription program. It covers a little bit less. We'll talk about it. So PAAD covers your Part D, so your Medicare Part D prescription drug coverage. It covers those premiums. It also limits the copays that you would need to pay to $7 for a name brand drug and $5 for a generic drug. In this program, there's no resource test. They're only looking at your income. So for a single person to be eligible for PAAD, their income must be under $28,399. For a couple, their income must be under $34,817 to get this full prescription drug assistance program, PAD. For Senior Gold, it doesn't cover your Medicare Part D premiums, but it offers some limitations on the out-of-pocket cost of the prescriptions. So your copay is limited to $15 plus 50% of the remaining cost. But most importantly, there's a cap on how much you can pay for prescription drugs under this program of $2,000 a year for a single person. And for that program, the income cap is $38,399 for a single person and $44,817 for a married couple. And I just see a question in the chat. Does income exclude Social Security? No, it does not. Social Security counts gross Social Security. So even though you're paying a Medicare Part B premium a lot of the times, that still counts as income to you, even though you never see a penny of it. So it's gross.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the gross part, because oftentimes I think people think it's their after-tax income that they're looking at, and it is not. It is that income that is on the first line of your 1040, which says this is all the income that I received for the year, and it would include income whether it's taxable or not. So if you have Social Security that isn't taxable, it's still income for Medicaid purposes. I just want to clarify that because I've seen that question before.
That's a great question. So the last program that I just want to let you know is out there, it's available, is called the JACC program, JACC. And this program basically offers home health aid assistance, but it gives higher income and asset limits than the Medicaid program, but it also offers less hours. So it's kind of a middle ground program. You may not be ready for Medicaid. You may just need a little bit of help. It's there. I prefer this. If you're in the position where you need to get home health aid assistance, it's more important that we look towards the long term, as Deirdre said, kind of planning down the future and say, okay, maybe JACC works now, but it's not going to work forever. So you don't want to get JACC and then think you're good to go for the rest of your life. You want to start looking at MLTSS at that point. But JACC is, like I said, another path to getting some home health aid assistance. For this program, your income must be, for a single person, under $39,918. For a couple, it's $5,299. And with this, you can have assets up to $40,000 for a single person or $60,000 for a couple. So it's a little bit higher.
So Ryan, when you're talking about those assets for a single person and a couple with that program, is your house continue to be an excluded, your primary residence continue to be an excluded asset like you were discussing with the MLTSS program?
Yes, it does. The big difference with these programs is when it comes to those spousal impoverishment protections. You'll see I gave an amount for the couple. Here they count both spouses' income. And here they don't have a community spouse resource allowance, so an amount of protected resources for the spouse. It is the limits that are listed, period, end of story. So that MLTSS program really does give us the most flexibility when it comes to spousal options as well.
Excellent, thank you. If we can just flip to the last slide, please. I think while our goal here is, if we can just flip to the next slide, while our goal here is to really be talking about how it is that you can benefit from programs, I think that for some people, it's an overwhelming amount of information for what it is that you can do. So this is Porzio planning. And what our thought is that for families, once you get more information, you can plan for how to be able to take advantage of things. The idea being, sometimes there's a crisis that happens. You know, they have a sudden illness, it wasn't anticipated, they have a stroke, and all of a sudden what am I going to do in this situation? Other times, and for what I see more frequently, the family knows that there's going to be a need for assistance at some point in time in the future, and the future may be getting nearer and nearer and things like that. So what I would encourage you to do is, first of all, tune in next month when we're going to be talking about specifically how to potentially plan. I don't need long-term care now, but what if I need it in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? How does that look like? That's what our topic is going to be next month. And then secondly, looking at PorziOPlanning.com, we have a whole host of resources that talk about whether it's specific Medicaid issues, what happens with being in a nursing home facility, what your rights are in a nursing home facility, various care conversations that our partner Crystal West Edwards has had with other members of the community. That is there to be a terrific resource for you. So with that, Ryan, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us. Just so you know, and not only do I do this also, but I work with you. I have, I believe, 7 pages of notes here. So I'm sure that our audience got a huge amount of information. Is there any sort of 1 or 2 takeaways that on the idea of Medicaid 101 that you really suggest that our audience sort of incorporates it well at the end of what we've been able to present today?
So I would say the biggest takeaway you can all have is get some guidance from someone who specializes in this area, because there are so many pitfalls that you may not even realize are there, that if you don't get guidance from someone who really handles this stuff, you might end up in a situation where you're prolonging getting the Medicaid, you're prolonging the person needing help, or being in a nursing facility where you're having to pay. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is easy. It's really not. And you can get guidance early and make sure you avoid those pitfalls.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I think it is such an overwhelming thing, and most of the time that people are taking care of the decisions, caregiving is not their number 1 priority. They may be dealing with their own children, their own careers, and things along those lines. So to the extent that you can do planning, and that's why, with our conversation next month, I think that will dovetail nicely in with this. Here's what Medicaid provides. Here's how you can incorporate this into an overall plan addressing potential long-term care needs that somebody has. So with that, I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful rest of it's afternoon while we're doing this live, or the rest of your morning or your evening. If you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to address here, my email is on the screen. Ryan's email is on the screen. We are delighted to spend 20 minutes on the phone with you talking about whatever question it is that you have. We are very committed to being a resource to people, because this isn't easy. It's not only that, it's just not logical. There's just so many. It's like a pinball machine. Now I hit this one and now I have to go in this direction. So getting guidance through the maze is so important. As always, if there's any other topics that you would like to see, or any other questions that you have that you think it would be important for us to bring to the community, we would very much welcome your suggestions. And with that, I wish everybody a wonderful rest of their day. And Ryann, thank you so much for your insight today. Take care, everybody. Bye.